Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. Is this heaven? No, it's an Iowa episode. Today, we're going to take stock of the Senate race in Iowa featuring Senator Joni Ernst, the roller coaster race for governor, and what it all means for the competitive House districts across the Hawkeye State. And we'll do it all with Brianne Pfannenstiel of the Moines Register. Buckle up. I'm Jacob Rubashkin, Deputy Editor of Inside Elections, the go-to place for nonpartisan political analysis for more than 40 years. Now, you may notice that I am flying solo today, and that is because my co-host, Nathan Gonzalez of Inside Elections with Nathan Gonzalez, was so inspired by my trip last week to Dollywood in Tennessee's 1st Congressional District that he just had to jet off to Sandusky, Ohio, to the Cedar Point Amusement Park this week. Now, that is, of course, currently represented by Democrat Marcy Kaptur, and Ohio's 9th may be slightly more competitive in the general election than Tennessee's 1st Congressional District. But my park had Dolly Parton, so I think that I still win on that count. Anyways, Nathan will be back next week, but I am the captain for today's voyage out to the Midwest. But before we zero in on Iowa, there are a few recent congressional developments that we don't want you to miss. Now, in Pennsylvania, Democrat Janelle Stelson made her much anticipated bid for Congress official this week. The former Lancaster, Pennsylvania news anchor lost a close race to Republican Scott Perry last year and is back for another shot at the 10th district, which should be one of the most competitive races in the country. I actually just wrote a deep dive on this race a few days ago, which subscribers are reading in our newsletter and can always read on our website, insideelections.com. Moving south in Tennessee, former Representative Van Hillary will run for his old seat, Tennessee's 6th congressional district, now that incumbent John Rose is waging a long-shot bid for governor. Hillary serves as Rose's chief of staff, actually, in Congress, but he doesn't have a clean shot to the nomination. He's got to get through State Representative Johnny Garrett and potentially others before he can cruise to victory in the general election in this solid Republican district. In the Midwest, Republican Tudor Dixon said that she would not run for either Senate or governor in Michigan, helping answer some of the biggest remaining outstanding questions in both of those races. Now, in the Senate race, former Representative Mike Rogers is the frontrunner for the Republican nomination, but he still may face a primary against Congressman Bill Huizenga. In the governor's race, Congressman John James is the big dog in that primary, but he does face competition from state legislator Eric Nesbitt and former state attorney general Mike Cox. And finally, in North Carolina, Democrat Don Davis, who represents the eastern part of the state, said that he was interested in running for the now open Senate seat if former Governor Roy Cooper, also a Democrat, does not run for the nomination. If Davis ran, Democrats would have to find another strong challenger to hold on to his very swingy seat in eastern North Carolina that voted for Donald Trump last year. But the big story here, everyone in North Carolina is still waiting on Cooper to make a decision.
People will come, Ray. They'll come to Iowa for reasons they can't even fathom. They'll turn up your driveway, not knowing for sure why they're doing it. They'll arrive at your door as innocent as children, longing for the past.
I want to welcome our very special guest, Brianne Pfannenstiel of the Des Moines Register. Brianne is the chief politics reporter at the DMR and previously wrote for the Kansas City Star. Brianne, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Now, you know the drill. Before we get into the main stories of the day, we got to know, what congressional district did you grow up in?
I grew up in what is now the 1st Congressional District of Kansas. So big part of the western corner of the state and a little bit of Lawrence.
Okay, very cool. And growing up there, was politics kind of a big part of your life? Did you know that you wanted to be kind of running around chasing presidential candidates when you started your career, or did that come later?
That kind of came later. I really didn't have any kind of feeling that this is what I'd be doing with my life. I knew that I wanted to do journalism. I did a lot of different types of journalism kind of right out of school and kept gravitating back to public policy. So I moved to Iowa. I've been in the 3rd congressional district of Iowa for about 10 years now. So I moved to Iowa to cover the state house, to cover politics here, and really fell in love with it and kind of realized, this is what feels like home for me as far as a political beat. So it's been fun to do that for the last 10 years.
And over those 10 years, how many presidential candidates would you say you have met and interviewed for your work?
That's an excellent question. And I should sit down sometime and try and figure out what the actual number is. But I'd put it at dozens at this point, and you can put probably a lot of that to the 2020 Democratic presidential caucuses. There were so many people running at that point. So it's been a lot.
Yeah, gosh, I think there were probably 26, 27 candidates back then. And I guess all of them must have come to Iowa. Maybe Bloomberg got in after Iowa, but
and he still was here, all these people before they're candidates, they still make their way through Iowa. So you talk to a lot of them before they're official, and then, they get bigger and they move on. But it's fun to talk to them here when they're still just figuring it out.
And I've always wondered, especially for kind of these lower tier candidates, do they understand how much of a long shot they are? Or do you kind of have to approach Iowa and the caucuses there as like, I can actually win this thing, or I can do what I need to do, even if I'm, Andrew Yang or, Seth Moulton or Eric Swalwell, this could, are they all really true believers in their own potential to win in Iowa and go on to win the whole thing?
I think you have to be a true believer to put yourself through that. I mean, running for president and running in Iowa, I think, can be very humbling. You're kind of this big shot in DC or whatever your circle is, and you come through here and you're really introducing yourself to people and kind of putting yourself through the ringer. But I do think they have a vision. They see whatever the path might be. And the Iowa caucuses, for better or for worse, have a history of letting the long shot come up and win. And so they can point to these moments in the past where it's really worked for people like Barack Obama and Jimmy Carter. And you can say, well, maybe I'm that guy. But there are only so many Barack Obamas in the world.
I think there's only one. I think, we hear as much as any other, many other Democratic politicians would like there to be multiples. It's always look a little skeptical when a candidate says they're going to follow that particular path to success. I do want to talk about midterms, obviously, before we get to the presidential, but I need to know, what is the most ridiculous thing that you've seen a candidate do on the campaign trail in Iowa at the state fair, or just kind of out talking to voters? What is the most crazy thing that you've seen one of these candidates do for the attention, for the potential to try and catch fire?
That's a really great question. I'd have to think about it a little bit since we're coming up on the state fair. I mean, the things people do at the fair specifically, there's a now famous photo of John Delaney riding the giant slide in dress pants and a button down, and he looks like he's not having any fun at all. You're almost certain that one of his staffers put him there and said, you have to do this for the photo ops and look like you're having fun, and that didn't quite land. So kind of just the fish out of water moments that these candidates find themselves in sometimes can always be really jarring. It's like, why do we have to do this to run for president? But here we are.
Yeah, that Delaney photo still comes up for me. I feel like the butter cow is another one. The Ted Cruz butter cow. I guess that's more, I mean, that'll follow his daughter longer than it follows him, perhaps. But
Right.
I think about that a lot. Kasich found his way to eating his way through the entire fair. It's always fun to see what comes out of those events. And like you said, we're going to have one coming up in a short while. And do we anticipate 2028 hopefuls starting to make the rounds here?
I really wasn't anticipating it, but kind of in the theme for me this year of expecting things to be a little quieter in Iowa and that not being the case at all. Ruben Gallego of Arizona is going to
Okay.
make his first swing through Iowa. So he's doing the state fair and then doing a town hall with the Democratic Party.
Very interesting. Yeah, no, he's maybe a bit of a dark horse, but seems like the kind of guy that might strike a nerve there.
It's if it's wide open, you might as well throw your hat in and see what you find out, right? You could be the guy. You could be the next Barack Obama.
Exactly, right. I mean, he just won election. He doesn't have to run for re-election until 2030. So he's got time to kill. But we'll see. We'll see how that all goes over. But let's get into our main stories of the day. Republican Joni Ernst is up for re-election next year to potentially a third term in the United States Senate. So it's not been the best time for the retired Army Lieutenant Colonel to face some negative headlines. She went through the ringer when she was deciding how to vote for some controversial Trump cabinet nominations, and then she made not great national news at a town hall a couple months ago when she responded to a constituent's concern about Medicaid by saying, "We all are going to die." In the wake of those comments and those issues, several Democrats have launched campaigns for what will be an uphill battle against Senator Ernst in the Senate race. Let's take a brief listen to some of those Democrats and their intro videos.
I'm Nathan Sage, dad, mechanic, sports radio host, vet, child of a trailer park in Iowa. And I'm going to kick corporate Republican Joni Ernst's ass next November.
I'm JD Scholten, and I'm running for U.S. Senate against Joni Ernst right here in Iowa. I wasn't planning on doing this right now, but I just can't sit on the sidelines after Joni's recent town hall justifying gutting Medicaid because we're all going to die.
I'm Zach Walls. Growing up, I was an Eagle Scout. And it might sound a little old-fashioned, but I still live by those scouting values. Most important to me is that a scout is brave. I learned to stand up for what's right, especially when it's hard. That's what I've done as a state senator, and that's why I'm running for the United States Senate.
There's been some conversation here in DC about whether or not Senator Ernst is even going to run for re-election. And I know folks in DC can often be very insular in these conversations and hypothetical and throw around all sorts of crazy scenarios. So I'm curious, what is the conversation like in Iowa? What is the expectation on the ground about whether Senator Ernst is even going to run for another term in the Senate?
I think for a really long time, we were expecting that she was going to be running again and treating it that way. She said last summer at her annual fundraiser that she would run for re-election, that wasn't a question. But then it kind of became more of a question. And I don't know if that's just because Iowans are a little gun shy after Governor Kim Reynolds decided that she wasn't going to seek re-election after we all expected her to. But it's very much been the chatter here in Iowa lately, the will she or won't she? And there are a lot of rumors floating around, and so far none of them appear to me to be connected to people who are actually in a position to know whether Joni Ernst is running for re-election. She seems to be really keeping that close to the chest. But I think the common through line for me is that she hasn't decided. That seems to be maybe the thread of truth that seems to be running through all of this. Because even when Politico reported on this last week, her communication staff, her spokesperson, didn't put this to rest. She didn't say, "Yeah, she's definitely running. This is silly." So it does feel that people are waiting for her to make a call one way or the other. She very well could be leaning toward running again, and this is all going to be a moot point in a few weeks. But so far, we don't have that answer.
And is there a moment, is there kind of a drop dead moment for her where either maybe not legally or logistically she has to say what she's going to do, but traditionally, by this point in the cycle, she would be in or she would be out? Or can she really drag this on for as long as she'd like?
Yeah, I don't know what timeline she's working with on this. I think probably she's got quite a bit of deference from folks in the party on what she wants to do. But I would think, and this is just kind of me speculating, that she's scheduled her annual fundraiser as the Roast and Ride fundraiser. It's a big motorcycle ride. She comes in, has national guests. I would think that probably by then she would want to say publicly what it is, that fundraiser's for. Is it for reelection? Is it for something else? So that's kind of the point that I'm looking to as a reporter. But Labor Day is also kind of an unofficial date in politics where people like to kind of have some answers and get campaigns moving. So I would think certainly maybe late summer, fall, we would see an answer there one way or another.
Speaking of, I think, fun internet memes, I think the Roast and Ride was where we got that great photo of Mike Pence in the huge motorcycle helmet. Is that?
That is indeed where we got.
Okay, great.
We've got all these great photos from Iowa.
Wonderful. Well, I look forward to seeing what we get out of this year's edition, and maybe some clarity from the senator on what her plans are. I mean, do you get the sense that like there's a reason why she might not run for reelection? It seems like these days, senators are liable to stay there for decades. I mean, Senator Ernst is 55. I think that's 10 years younger than the median senator is. So there's no reason why she couldn't, if she wanted to and can get reelected, couldn't serve for another 30 years in the United States Senate, as crazy as that may seem. So is there a reason why all of a sudden, there's all this speculation about whether she'll run again?
Right. She could be the next Chuck Grassley if she wanted to. It'd still be
40 years. Yeah.
Right. Why stop at 30? No. And this is speculation. I'm not going to pretend to have insight into her thinking about all of this right now. But if you look at the political climate, she really went through the ringer, as you mentioned, with the Pete Hegseth nomination. And she really took a lot of heat from Republicans. And that can't be a fun place to be. And I don't know how she came out of that feeling about her place in the administration, or if she, there had been some reporting that perhaps she was interested in that position. But I also think it's reasonable for politicians to say, 2 terms is good. I've done what I want to do. Maybe it's time to move on. We don't see that a lot in politics. And certainly Iowa politicians tend to hang on for a long time. But that could be part of it, just the climate and maybe some of the backlash that she's gotten on some of these things. Yeah.
I mean, I think, Gary Peters up in Michigan surprised people when he said he was going to call it quits this year, and he's a decade older. So, like I said, just seeing someone at 55, as reasonable as it sounds to those of us who would like to retire one day, right, is always a bit of a shock when it comes certainly to the Senate. And what do you make of the Democratic field so far? I know when we sat down with one of the candidates, J.D. Scholten, a couple weeks ago, and he told us that he had really bumped up his plans to get in the race and kind of had almost decided, not on a whim necessarily, but he had been on the fence, and then he kind of flipped a switch and decided to go for it. And I think that's kind of emblematic in some ways of this Democratic primary, which started out kind of sleepy. And all of a sudden, I mean, there are 3 candidates in already. I don't know if there are more people that are on your radar potentially. But what do you make of all this kind of energy on the Democratic side of the aisle here?
Well, I think that's the first thing I'd say is there's energy this cycle. And that maybe wasn't a given, coming off the last election cycle where I think Iowa Democrats were just really feeling incredibly defeated over the way everything went at the national level all the way down through the state. So I think there's a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm to get moving and to try and capitalize on some of these moments. Like you said, with the Medicaid, we're all going to die comments. I think J.D. Scholten rightly looked at that moment and said, I can get a lot of earned media for this. And he really did and capitalized on that moment and was on a lot of national broadcast and interviews for that. But we've also got State Senator Zach Walz, who I think some people are quite excited about. He's somebody who kind of grew up in the eye of Iowa politics. He, first drew national recognition, went viral for talking on the floor of the Iowa legislature speaking in favor of marriage equality. But we've also got a guy named Nathan Sage, who is kind of a small town Chamber of Commerce executive, who is really kind of pitching the blue collar approach to all of this. So we've got a really kind of wide variety of candidates here. Someone else that I'm keeping an eye on is Jackie Norris. She's a Des Moines school board chair. She was I believe, a chief of staff for Michelle Obama. So she's somebody who's quite well known in local Democratic politics. So we could have a pretty lively primary there. And so that's really interesting to follow. But I think the key right now is enthusiasm. We're seeing people get into the race pretty early compared to maybe some other cycles.
And do any of those candidates you mentioned have the inside track, or do any of them start out with any particular advantage? Or this feels like a very wide open contest from my very removed perspective.
No, I think that's right. I think that's a good assessment. So far, it doesn't feel like any of those candidates have a clear edge. You might look at somebody like Nathan Sage and say, well, he's maybe a dark horse candidate. And that might be true, but he still came into this last fundraising period. He announced, I think, $700,000 in fundraising, which is nothing to sneeze at for somebody who's never run for office before and is very much on par with Zach Walz. We're still waiting to see J.D. Schulten's fundraising numbers. But I don't think anybody is the clear front runner there, which makes it an interesting race to cover and to see who really kind of is able to resonate with folks in Iowa.
Yeah. And it's been since 2008 that a Democrat won a Senate race in Iowa, the last term of institution Tom Harkin. It was a contested race in 2014 that Ernst won. Again in 2020, Democrats spent a lot of money there. Even the 2022 race, there were a few moments where Mike Franken thought that he might have, some momentum there. But Iowa Democrats have come up short again and again. They've lost, I think, all but one statewide office holder by this point. They don't hold any of the congressional districts. You talk to a lot of Iowa Democrats. What do they feel like went wrong, and what do they think that they have to do to get themselves back in contention after a really brutal decade?
Yeah, I don't think there's consensus on exactly what went wrong for them, but clearly what they're doing hasn't been working. And I think the last cycle, maybe they struggled from some candidate recruitment and the malaise maybe that was part of the Joe Biden candidacy before things switched over to Kamala Harris. But I think the problem is that they've really dug themselves into a hole in this state. As you mentioned, there are just no, Rob Sand as the state auditor is the highest ranking elected Democrat in this state. So, not all that high up on the food chain here. So as far as voter registrations, they're just down substantially compared to Republicans. Republicans have had the momentum. They've been on board with Donald Trump. They've been largely unified behind him. They had the Republican caucuses in 2024 and the lead up to that. So they were able to generate a ton of enthusiasm and a ton of organizing. And Democrats did lose the caucuses. Not that there would have been a competitive race the last time, but I think they really were feeling the effects of not having that organizing opportunity to be able to keep pace with the Republicans. So I think there's a little bit of maybe buyer's remorse of letting that go maybe a little too easily. So we'll see what the next cycle brings.
And in the scenario that Senator Ernst chooses not to run for reelection, who should we keep an eye on the Republican side for that open seat?
I think everybody's going to be watching Ashley Hinson. She's the 2nd District Congresswoman right now. She's a former newscaster. She's been in the seat for several cycles now, and people really see her as being a very sharp politician, good fundraising capability, somebody who would be interested in sliding in there behind her. And so in a lot of ways, I think Republicans would be in a very strong position to hold that seat, obviously regardless given the state's political climate. But I think people would see Ashley Hinson as being a very strong candidate to come in behind Joni Ernst.
Do you think that she would be able to clear the field, or would she have to get past other candidates, regardless of, and I agree, I think she presents very strongly as a potential candidate.
Well, I think it's hard for people to pass up an opportunity when a race comes open. So I'm sure we'd see some other interest. Matt Whitaker is somebody who people are always kind of keeping an eye on here. He is Donald Trump's ambassador to NATO currently, and so he would probably have to give up that post to run for an open Senate seat. But he's somebody who people are interested in. And, there are just always people who are maybe off our radar just a little bit, people in the business community, other folks who I think would be tempted to come in. I just had a conversation like this with some colleagues at the Arizona Republic who were asking about Carrie Lake, who is a native Iowan. She told us in April that she's not interested in running for office again, but you never know what an open Senate seat might do to tempt people back off the benches.
Yeah. Well, maybe, I don't know if John Delaney ever moved back after he moved from my home state of Maryland out to Iowa. So if he's itching to get back into the fray. And do you think that is the sense that the seat becomes more difficult for Republicans to hold more of a headache if she chooses not to run for re-election, or given kind of the issues with the base over the Hegseth stuff and the comments about Medicaid, and we know that's going to be such a issue for Democrats this cycle, is it actually potentially better for Republicans if they get a clean slate with a candidate like a Hinson or somebody else who hasn't had the struggles that Ernst has this year?
I think somebody could make that case for sure. Joni Ernst has struggled with the base at times. She's voted for marriage equality, things that have riled the base. She's voted for certain red flag law things that have riled the base. Gun rights have riled the base here in Iowa. And then, of course, the Pete Hegseth stuff. So it feels like there are several things over the years that, have gotten some folks upset. She's obviously been able to hold on to that seat regardless. So I think she'd still be in a very strong position if she runs again. But I can see, somebody could make the case that coming in fresh without that baggage, somebody like Ashley Hinson, who really has aligned herself incredibly closely with the president. And not that Joni Ernst hasn't, but just, some of those cases like Hegseth where there's, kind of a break there.
Yeah. And I think it's always so interesting, and this isn't just about Ernst, but I think she falls in this category. When somebody first gets elected to a state that's a swing state, and then the political ground shifts underneath them, even within the same party, right? It's not as if she got elected as a Republican in a state that became very Democratic. She got elected as a Republican in a state that only became more Republican. And there's friction there as well, even though it's internal to the party itself. I think, the Iowa of 2025 is very different than the Iowa of 2014.
Absolutely.
In some fundamental ways. So that'll be one to watch. But I want to move on so we can talk about Rob Sand and the governor's race. In addition to that Senate race, Iowa is also playing host to a competitive gubernatorial race next year. Incumbent Governor Kim Reynolds kicked off the roller coaster here by announcing earlier this year that she would not run for re-election. Iowa, of course, no term limits. Famously, Terry Branstad, former governor of Iowa, I think is the longest serving governor in American history. So if Kim Reynolds wanted to keep running, nothing to keep her from doing so, but she decided not to seek a third term. That's kicked off a Republican primary. But as we saw in the Senate race, there's also some rare energy on the Democratic side. State Auditor Rob Sand is the highest profile candidate there. He kicked off his campaign earlier this year as well. Let's take a brief listen to his message.
Hey, Iowa, it's Rob Sand, and I'm running for governor. I'm doing it because we need more public service and less politics. A lot of politicians yap about making a place redder or bluer. I want Iowa to be better and truer.
Brianne, what was the reaction when Governor Reynolds announced that she wasn't going to run again? And how has that shaped the governor's race ever since then?
Yeah, I think people were shocked, by and large. This was a decision, again, that she kept very close to the chest. people didn't know until, the morning that she made her announcement, even some of those within her closest circle. So we all really found out, that news together when she posted it on social media. And so it really was a surprise because she had been making all of the moves toward reelection that she would have expected from her in terms of hiring staff and planning all of the events that go with that. So we were really surprised. People in Iowa politics were really surprised. And what it did was just kind of, shuffle the whole board, because suddenly, we're calling everyone on our Rolodex, right? Of, are you going to be running for governor? And they're like, we found this out 30 minutes just like you did. I don't know. And so it was a fun, probably fun 48 hours, 72 hours where everybody was like, well, should I run for governor? And we kind of whittled that down to what we're seeing. So it was a surprise. And I think it really reset the governor's race in a way that people weren't expecting.
Since then, any number of candidates on the Republican side have jumped in. And I guess Brad Sherman was already in the race, kind of challenging Reynolds from the right prior to her announcement. But Congressman Randy Feenstra seems like kind of the big dog in this primary so far. He represents the northwest corner of the state, the most conservative part of the state. Is it fair to call him a front runner, or is there still a lot of development left in this Republican primary before we get a sense of who's in the driver's seat?
Yeah, I think at this point he does seem to be the front runner. Some things have shaken out in recent days. Everybody was waiting on our Attorney General, Brenna Byrd, to decide whether she was going to get into the race. She endorsed Donald Trump ahead of the 2024 Iowa caucuses. She was his highest profile endorser when a lot of other people were sitting on the edges. And so we all know that Donald Trump rewards loyalty. And so as she was thinking about getting in, I think it kept people, kind of waiting to see what would happen, because if she got in with a Trump endorsement, that very well could have, sealed the deal for her. But she announced just before the 4th of July that she was going to take a pass. We saw Zach Nunn say, yep, that reset the field. We're going to think about it again. Just this past week, Donald Trump was on a phone call. We can't know exactly what he told Zach Nunn, but we can probably guess what the tone was. We need you in that 3rd district frontline congressional seat. He officially has now taken a second pass on running for governor. So it does feel like the field is settling down a little bit. And it is smaller than maybe we would have expected. We've got Randy Feenstra, who is the big dog, the congressional representative. But we've also got a state representative, Eddie Andrews, who, I think would have to pull a lot of money together and pull some coalitions together. State Senator Mike Buslow is someone who's still thinking about it. He's formed an exploratory committee and is potentially looking to get into the race as well.
Did Brenna Byrd's decision not to run surprise you as well? Did it take people off guard? I mean, I remember seeing her speak at the RNC. She's been talked about as kind of this rising star. Obviously, she won, maybe not an upset victory to get her job, but she knocked off a guy who, how many terms? 8 terms? It was, to win her spot as AG. This seems like a moment tailor-made for her. She's got the Trump connection. What went wrong, or what happened here? Maybe this is just like, she likes being AG better than she'd like being governor, but is there a reason why she decided to pass on what on paper looks like such a great opportunity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was surprising to see her not run, because it does seem like a position that, she had potentially been positioning herself for politically, looking in from the outside. It seemed like something that she would be interested in. I think, the Iowa political community really expected her to do it for all the reasons you laid out, not least of which a Trump endorsement would really, really help her in a primary. But I think there were probably some concerns about how she might perform in a general election, being so closely tied to Donald Trump and all of that. So I don't know if maybe she was presented with some internal polling about how the race would be shaping up. Randy Feenstra was very aggressive in working to nail down some of the biggest donors in the state. So I think he deserves some credit for getting out very early and kind of boxing out some of, that lane for folks and really nailing down the fundraising aspect of that. But to your point as well, in her statement saying that she would seek reelection, she said she has a lot of work that she wants to do there. She might very well just enjoy the work that she's doing as Attorney General right now.
Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned the Trump factor of it all. Obviously, Byrd would have been the Trump candidate. Without her in the race, where does Trump go, and how big a thing, right? Because Feenstra didn't endorse Trump ahead of the 2024 caucuses. He made a big show of not endorsing anyone in that Republican primary field, and we know Trump has a long memory here. Obviously, Feenstra votes Trump's way in Congress, but is there bad blood there? Is there a possibility that Trump might get behind somebody else and kind of spoil the party for a guy who has had a lot of things go his way in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, I think, it would be surprising to me if Donald Trump endorses Randy Feenstra. It's probably not out of the question because he has, been vocal about wishing all of these high profile Iowa Republicans had endorsed him ahead of the caucuses. He's very salty about that. And, appears to have, made some amends with folks like Kim Reynolds. But I think that's probably something that still weighs on his mind as far as offering his own endorsement. So that would be surprising to me. Mike Buslow, I think everybody who's gotten into the race or who is thinking about the race has made overtures to the White House and is trying to get that endorsement because of what it will do for them in a primary election. Having Donald Trump on your side is a huge deal. And even those who aren't necessarily going to be endorsed, even without that, Randy Feenstra is going to great lengths to show his allegiance to Trump and how in lockstep they are, and, really touting things like the big, beautiful bill.
Yeah. And does Governor Reynolds have a choice in this race? Does she have still political clout, even as she's now essentially a lame duck, to try and steer her favored candidate, if she has one, to a primary win?
Right. She's, I think, still very beloved by a lot of Iowa Republicans. She's caused a little bit of a stir lately in vetoing some legislation that had to do with carbon capture pipelines that has kind of divided the base a little bit. But I think by and large, she still has the loyalty of Iowa Republicans and could weigh in and do that. She's said publicly that she doesn't plan to endorse in the race, that she'll help whoever gets the nomination. But as we know in politics, sometimes you can be helpful behind the scenes to people who you want to be helpful to. She obviously has an enormous reach across the state and has all kinds of connections that would be helpful to somebody running for governor. So we'll see whether that holds, right? But she has said publicly she doesn't plan to endorse.
Yeah. And waiting for the winner of this Republican primary, in all likelihood, is going to be Rob Sand, who we heard from a little while ago, state auditor, last Democratic statewide office holder in Iowa. How does he make this race competitive? What does this race look like? And what does it mean for Iowa Democrats to have a candidate like him as their standard bearer next year?
Well, I think it's super important for Iowa Democrats to have a really strong contender, because even with somebody like Rob Sand, who I think people are very excited about, who comes in with an enormous amount of money that he can funnel into this race. His relatives are some of the biggest philanthropists in the Des Moines area and in the state. So he has access to a lot of capital that's going to be absolutely huge for Democrats. He has a message, too, that is really tailored to kind of that in-between voter. I think probably they're looking to people like Laura Kelly and Andy Beshear, who won in red states in some of these elections, to be able to say that, yeah, I'm a Democrat. And actually, he says this on the campaign trail. I had to pick a party in order to register for the primary. I picked the lesser of two evils, and that's the Democratic Party. So that's kind of what he's going around saying and hoping that it's going to resonate. But again, Iowa Democrats are in such an enormous hole as far as voter registrations, as far as just their infrastructure across the state compared to where they were in 2018, where, they lost the governor's race by about 3 percentage points. So it's a different landscape. As you mentioned, Iowa has gotten redder over the last 5 or so years. 5-10 years, and that's really going to be a factor. But I think people are looking at Rob Sand as a different type of candidate, somebody who can work really hard and somebody who has a lot of access to capital.
And are Democrats more excited about this race than they are about the Senate race at this point?
Yes, I think Iowa Democrats are really looking to the governor's race as their best opportunity to win a statewide race this year. I think they see Rob Sand as a strong candidate with the right circumstances and potentially the right message, or at least a message that could actually go to winning over some of that middle ground, potentially some Republicans. So I think the governor's race is where people are paying attention, but you never know about the Senate race as well.
Yeah. And we've got House races in all four corners of the state that are interesting for their own reasons. And I do want to touch on those real quickly here, because as you mentioned, there's potential for at least two of the state's four Republicans to run for higher office, right? If that Senate race were to open up, Ashley Hinson, Zach Nunn pretty clearly wanted to run for governor and got persuaded to stay in his highly competitive district instead of seeking higher office. And then you've got, a highly competitive race in the first district with Mariannette Miller Meeks and a three match against former state representative Christina Bohannon, and an open primary in the fourth district where Feenstra is running for governor. There's a lot to cover here, and it could be its own podcast episode. But I want to get your take on two of these districts real quick. One is, what the heck is going on with Democrats in the Feenstra district? They thought they had their candidate, Kevin Tekow. I got embarrassed because I shouted him out on a podcast, a different podcast, as a candidate that kind of on paper was great for Democrats and seemed to check all the boxes for the kind of guy that want to run in that district. And then I think he dropped out, a day or two after that. So I texted his campaign. I was like, come on, guys, you couldn't have given me a heads up. Right. Anyways. And then, we've got the third district, which Democrats lost in 22 and have been trying to win back. There's a primary there. I'm curious kind of how that's playing out, but I guess we'll start in the second district, which is the northeast corner of the state, and the struggles that Democrats are going through right now there.
Right. Yeah, it was surprising to see Tekow end his campaign so early, because you're right. On paper, he did really seem like a strong candidate. And I think people, were interested to see what he could bring to the race. In his announcement, he said he was just unable to raise the kind of money that's necessary to run in that kind of seat. And again, I think if you haven't run for Congress before, if you haven't seen these campaigns up close, maybe it's easy to take for granted how much of your time is spent locked in a room making phone calls. You think maybe you're going to be out shaking hands and kissing babies, but it's raising money for a huge chunk of especially this early part of the race. And it's probably good to know early whether that's something that you enjoy doing or can do. And for him, it wasn't coming together. And so that's potentially concerning for Democrats, because, he does seem like a good qualified candidate who could make that race. So if he's not able to raise the money to be competitive, then who else is going to be able to get into that? So there's some rumblings about who else may get in. I think, some folks will come out on that, but it's an interesting race. Again, Ashley Hinson is incredibly disciplined and is a good fundraiser and really had no trouble holding on to that seat in the last election cycle.
Yeah. And I know, I guess I saw in the DMR just the other day that Lindsey James, who's a state legislator up there, is thinking about running there now that Tekow is out of the race, which I think we had reported months ago that she was thinking about it. And I think she had refuted that, said that she wasn't interested. And then I guess the circumstances change in politics. It's a good lesson there. We also have this Democratic primary in the third district. Sarah Trone Garriott, Jennifer Confirst, two Democratic state legislators who are vying for a chance to take on Zach Nunn. What are you seeing out of that race, which arguably is in the most competitive district in the state at this point?
Right. And kind of to the same point, it feels a little quiet at this early point. both of them are kind of sending out their messaging and their fundraising notes, but really, I would expect them to be locked in that basement room, right, making phone calls and raising money, because it's just gonna take an enormous amount of money to compete in any of these districts, and especially the third district where Zach Nunn is seen as vulnerable, but again held on quite relatively easily in 24 against another well-funded Democrat, and so it's just going to be, I think, very difficult for Democrats to move forward in that district. But both of them are well known. I think also quite disciplined. Sarah Garriott in particular has run in very difficult races and been able to flip those in the state legislature. Jennifer Confirst has been the minority leader. And so they're both strong candidates, and I'll be interested when we do eventually move into kind of the phase of this election where we do kind of get how they're going to differentiate themselves in this race, because I think messaging wise, it feels like they might be quite similar. They're not necessarily representing two different sides of the Democratic Party here. And so it might be who folks feel is the best messenger, the best person to go and potentially win those independent voters. So I'll be excited for us to kind of move into that phase of the election cycle. But so far, it's feeling a little sleepy in the third.
And what are, to the extent that voters are thinking about, maybe not the 2026 elections, because only the true sickos among us are thinking about those races right now, but to the extent that they're thinking about national politics, that they're thinking about kind of the same issues that are going to play a big role in these three or four House races, the Senate race, the Gov race. Is it, tariff policy, Medicaid, something else entirely? What is in the water at the moment in terms of the discourse out there?
Well, right now, I think certainly, Medicaid and SNAP policy and how that's going to be affecting Iowans. That's what Democrats have been putting a lot of organizing efforts behind, is really talking about, the one big beautiful bill that has just passed and what that's going to mean for Iowa voters. Certainly tariffs. It's been harder to kind of wrangle, as those have been really a moving target from the president and kind of what those mean broadly. But obviously that has a big impact on a farm state like Iowa. But it'll be interesting too, politics has become so nationalized, and certainly in those congressional races that matters. But I'm really interested in maybe the governor's race and how they're able to bring it back to Iowa issues. One issue that we'll be tracking, I kind of mentioned briefly, is this pipeline debate across the state and whether, eminent domain should be approved for the use of carbon capture pipelines to help support the ethanol industry. That's one that really cuts across interests in a way that is not directly on party lines. And that's always really interesting to me as a reporter, when things just aren't cut and dry Republican versus Democratic issues. And then, of course, the economy, right? Everybody's talking about how they should have messaged better, how they should have been talking about that in the last election cycle. And so what does that actually look like for these Democrats on the campaign trail? And in Iowa, it's always, can Democrats make inroads in rural areas? This is an area where they have completely cratered in a lot of cycles. And so are they able to regain some footholds there through some of these issues?
Yeah, all big questions. A lot of people smarter than me are going to spend a lot of money trying to figure out over the next 15 months. But who is counting? Like I said, we could talk all day about these couple of House races, but I don't think anyone would listen to that. So we'll wrap it up here. Brianne, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you can stick around for a few minutes for our final segment.
Absolutely.
Now it's time for our final segment, Look What I Found. This is anything we've stumbled across recently that we find interesting or notable. It doesn't have to be political. It can be a movie, a TV show, an album you really enjoyed, something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. I will kick us off here. I saw the new Superman movie last night. I was amazed that there were so many different formats that you could see it in. I was losing track between Real D, 3D, 4DX, Laser, IMAX, Dolby Atmos. It's like, oh my God, This decision paralysis here. I guess it's a good sign that like the movie theaters are still open and having offerings. But I saw it in regular 2D. I thought it was fun. It's like a goofy movie, but I think they've made Superman so gritty over the last couple of decades that it was fun to get it back to the goofiness. I thought the new guy they found to play him was pretty fun. I think Nicholas Hoult is like he plays a great villain. So I really enjoyed going to a superhero movie that didn't take itself too seriously, even if it's got some themes that are very relevant to the modern day. And as the director made quite clear in all these interviews he's been doing. But I really enjoyed the movie and would recommend it.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I was going to say. I saw the new superhero movie every weekend. But, I also had a great time. I'm kind of, I'm a tough sell on superhero movies these days. I'm really marveled out. I'm over a lot of it, but I found it really refreshing. I had a good time. And there is a great scene for journalism fans where Miss Lois Lane is interviewing Clark as Superman. And it's a great back and forth where she ends up being a much tougher interview than maybe he bargained for. So I really enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed Lois Lane in particular. And, the super dog added a fun lightheartedness to it as well.
Yeah, there were moments as a journalist that I was kind of struggling during the movie. I think that Superman or Clark Kent has questionable journalistic ethics to say the least. But I did see somebody on Twitter in response to journalists complaining about the inaccuracy in journalism of the movie, said something akin to like, this would be like a plumber playing Mario and complaining about his workmanship. It's just not, we're having two different conversations.
We're taking it a little too seriously, maybe.
As far as like, media representation of journalists go, I will take Clark Kent and Lois Lane, even Jimmy Olsen, any day of the week. It can be a lot worse. As someone who remembers watching House of Cards, for a DC journalist covering politics, it can be a lot worse than Superman.
We've got bigger battles to fight.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, I will let you go fight your bigger battles than this podcast. But thank you so much for joining. This was a ton of fun. We'll have to have you back to talk more about these races and, knock on wood, the 2028 presidential election as well.
Sounds like fun. I'll be here.
At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Dolly Parton. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tuzinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us next time.